She was standing in the Woolworths aisle, not browsing, not choosing between brands, comparing 2 tins of soup, cent by cent, reading glasses balanced on the tip of her nose. The trolley behind her was half full, not because she was nearly done, because she was being careful. If that image sits uncomfortably close to something you recognise, stay with me, because today I want to talk about the age pension, what it actually pays in 2026, and whether it is enough to live on. I know a bloke, 68, retired about 18 months ago from a job he held for over 30 years. Decent super balance, modest but solid. He owns his home outright, a 3-bedroom place in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it is his. He applied for the age pension shortly after he turned 67, went through the process at Services Australia, provided the paperwork, and started receiving the full single rate. At the time, he felt something he did not expect. Relief. Not excitement. Relief. Because for the first time in his working life, there was money arriving that did not depend on showing up. It came fortnightly, automatically, into his bank account, and it meant the power bill, the groceries, and the rego were covered. Just. That word, just, is where this story really starts. Because when he first went onto the pension, the numbers worked. Not comfortably, but they worked. He could cover his essentials, put a little aside for the car service, and still have a pub lunch with his mates on a Friday. He was not wealthy, but he was managing. His retirement savings combined with the pension gave him a version of financial security that felt stable enough. Then the cost of living started to shift. Not all at once. It never does. The electricity bill came in a little higher. Then the grocery shop that used to cost $140 started costing $170, then $200. Insurance went up. The council rates notice had a number on it he had not seen before. And the petrol, even though he drives less now than he ever has, crept up too. He did not panic. He adjusted. Dropped the Friday lunch to every second week. Started buying the store brand everything. Turned the heater off in the bedroom. Small adjustments, quietly made without telling anyone. Because that is what his generation does. They adjust, they recalculate, and they make it work. But here's the thing I want you to sit with for a moment. He is on the full age pension. He owns his home. He has no debt. And he is still adjusting downward. If the full pension, with no rent and no mortgage, requires quiet, ongoing sacrifice, what does that tell us about where the numbers actually sit in 2026? That is the question at the centre of this video. So let me walk you through it properly. The age pension is not one number. It is a system, and the system has several moving parts, each one worth understanding. Let me take them one at a time. First, the payment itself. Under current rates, and these are indexed twice a year in March and September, so always check the latest on the Services Australia website. The maximum age pension for a single person is approximately $28,500 a year. For a couple combined, it is roughly $43,000. That includes the base rate, the pension supplement, and the energy supplement. In fortnightly terms, because that is how it actually arrives, a single person receives roughly $1,100. A couple, about $1,650 combined. Now, I want you to do something. Think about your last fortnight of expenses. The groceries, the electricity, even just the daily supply charge ticking away whether you use power or not. The petrol, the prescriptions, the insurance that comes out monthly but still has to be budgeted for. The phone, the internet, the council rates divided down. The water. If you're a single homeowner on the full pension, no rent, no mortgage, you have roughly $1,100 a fortnight to cover all of that. And if you're honest about the numbers, you know it is tight. Not impossible, but tight. That is not a comfortable retirement lifestyle by any measure. It is survival arithmetic. Now, who actually qualifies for the full pension? This is where the assets test and the income test come in. And this is the part of the system that causes the most confusion and the most anxiety. So stay with me, understanding how the assets test works and how pension eligibility is determined. That is what separates worry from clarity. The assets test works like this. If you own your home, Services Australia looks at everything you own outside the home itself. Your savings, your investments, your superannuation balance if you are over age, pension age, your car, furniture, caravan, the lot. Under current thresholds, if those countable assets add up to less than approximately $302,000 for a single homeowner, you receive the full pension. For a couple who own their home, the Centrelink assets test threshold is roughly $451,000 combined. Below the line, full pension. Above it, the pension starts to reduce. And here is the bit that trips people up. The reduction is not a cliff. It is a slope. For every $1,000 you hold above that lower threshold, your pension reduces by $3 per fortnight. So if you are $10,000 over, your pension drops by $30 a fortnight. It is gradual, not a sudden cut-off, but the anxiety around it often feels like one. I have seen people genuinely agonise over whether to accept a small inheritance, not because the money would not help, but because they are terrified it will push them over a threshold. And in most cases, the math shows they are still better off, even with a small pension reduction. But the fear of crossing that line is real, and I've seen it hundreds of times. Then there is the income test, and this is where deeming rates enter the picture. Let me explain this one simply, because it is one of those things the system never makes clear. Centrelink does not look at what your savings actually earn. They apply a deemed rate of return, a percentage they assume your money is earning, whether it actually is or not. Under current rules, the lower deeming rate is 0.25% on roughly the first 60,000 of your financial assets and 2.25% on everything above that. The pension income test threshold then determines how much of that deemed income reduces your payment. Here is why that frustrates people. If your savings are sitting in a bank account earning almost nothing and in 2026, many accounts still pay very modest interest, Centrelink might assess you as if you're earning more than you actually are. That gap between what the system assumes and what your bank statement actually shows, that is where the frustration lives. And fair enough. It is a strange system, but understanding how it works means you can plan around it rather than being caught off guard by it. So let me bring this back to the cost of living. The pension is indexed. It does go up. It is adjusted twice a year based on the Consumer Price Index, the Pensioner and Beneficiary Living Cost Index, and it is benchmarked against a percentage of average male weekly earnings. The system is designed to keep the pension roughly in step with living costs. But here is the honest truth. And I want to be upfront about this. The indexation has not always kept pace with the costs that hit retirees hardest: groceries, energy, insurance, health. These categories have risen faster than the general CPI in recent years. So while the pension does go up, the things you spend the pension on have gone up faster. That is the gap. And that gap is what people feel at the checkout, at the petrol station, and when the quarterly insurance bill arrives. So what can you actually do with this information? Here are a few practical things worth checking. Not advice, just information that puts you in a stronger position. First, if you're not currently receiving the age pension and you think you might be eligible, check. The thresholds are indexed and they change. Someone who was just over the assets test limit 12 months ago may now be under it. You can check your potential pension eligibility using the estimator tools on the Services Australia website, servicesaustralia.gov.au. You do not need to commit to anything. You can run the numbers privately before you pick up the phone. And if the idea of walking into a Services Australia office makes you uncomfortable, I understand. It is one of the most common barriers I see. People who are legally entitled to the pension putting it off because the process feels daunting or because they associate it with asking for help. It is not asking for help. It is claiming an entitlement your decades of tax contributions paid for. There is no shame in it. None. Second, if you're already on the pension, check whether you're receiving the correct rate. Log into your MyGov account, find your Centrelink details, and look at the payment summary. If your circumstances have changed, if you have spent down savings, if your super balance has shifted, if you have sold an asset, your rate may need reassessing. Sometimes people receive a part pension when they now qualify for a higher rate, simply because they have not reported a change. Third, look at your state and territory concessions. Beyond the federal pension, most states offer support that many pensioners do not claim. Council rate reductions, electricity and gas concessions, water bill discounts, public transport cards, vehicle registration discounts. These vary by state and the eligibility criteria differ, but they can add up to a meaningful amount over the course of a year. Your local Services Australia office or your state government concessions website can tell you what is available in your area. Fourth, if you have superannuation alongside the pension, understand how those two interact. Your super balance, once you reach age pension age, is counted as a financial asset under the assets test and is subject to deeming under the income test. The way you draw down your super, the rate, the timing, the structure can influence your pension entitlement. This is where a proper super drawdown strategy becomes genuinely important. And this is one area where talking to a qualified, independent financial advisor is worth the investment. Someone who charges a fee for advice, not a commission on a product. Whether it is tax strategy, making your super last in retirement, or maximising your pension, the interaction between your super fund and your pension eligibility is one of the most complex parts of the system, and getting it right can make a real difference to your total retirement income. And here is the reassurance I want to leave you with. It is not too late. Whether you are 62 and still working, 67 and just starting the pension, or 75 and wondering whether you have been on the right rate all along, it is not too late to check. to ask, to understand. The system doesn't punish you for asking questions, and a good advisor will never make you feel foolish for not knowing something that was never properly explained. There is something else worth exploring, something that connects directly to what we have covered today. The way your superannuation interacts with your pension entitlement is not just about the total amount. It is about how you structure your retirement income stream, which investment option your super fund holds you in, and how the deeming rates assess what it generates. That relationship between your super and your pension is one of the most important and least understood parts of retirement planning, and it is something we go deeper into in another video. If this helped make sense of something that felt confusing, share it with someone you know who is approaching retirement or already in it. Sometimes all it takes is someone explaining the system in plain language. And if you know someone who is still standing in that supermarket aisle doing the quiet maths in their head before putting something back on the shelf, send them this. I am curious, have you checked whether you are receiving the right pension rate? Or is there a letter from Services Australia still sitting on the kitchen bench waiting for the kettle to boil? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And your questions genuinely shape what I cover next.